The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Does sound like I've been smoking a pack this morning. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah, that's good enough here. So let's get started. Okay. So my name is Mitch Milam, and today we are going to cover some of the changes that they are going to be introducing within the version 9 of Dynamics 365 within the JavaScript object model. So this is me. You can reach me at email or on Twitter or LinkedIn or on my YouTube channel. As always, this webinar is going to be recorded and it will be placed on my YouTube channel as soon as I get it converted and uploaded, which will probably be later today or this weekend sometime. I would ask you to subscribe to the channel so you always get updates, so you don't have to rely on me to send you the email saying it's up, but it usually gets up sometime within the next 24 hours, depending if I have technical issues or not. So a little bit of housekeeping. As you know, you're muted, and if you want to talk, you can just put a question in the question box, or you can raise your hand with the little fly out there, and I'll unmute you. You can ask your question. So let's get started. So if you didn't know, I actually have a JavaScript course. It's at learn.xrmcoaches.com. And I'm actually going to be adding the material, the new stuff that they have to that course. Probably what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clone that course and add this new stuff because it's so different in some areas that if I intermix everything together, it would be really, really confusing, I think. So I'm just going to create a separate course, and then when you buy it, you get both courses as part of the package. So if you haven't been out there, go ahead and take a look. There's a lot of free content. You don't have to buy it. You can just sign up for the free stuff and take a look. And if you want more, you can purchase it then. So take a look at there. So I can't spell deprecated for some reason. Is that right? So today we're going to talk about the deprecated client APIs, the new client APIs. What does this really all mean for us? And to get into some Q&A stuff. And then we'll look through some of the help pages and stuff like that and kind of go from there. So there's a lot of information that I'm probably not going to be able to cover today strictly because it's more like how does this new stuff work. But so mostly what I'm focusing on is what's changing. And the important thing to remember is nothing's really changed yet. So that's the thing. So one very important thing, as with any software package that you work with, is we need to embrace the suck, as they say. So some of the changes that we're going to see are going to be quite different. Let me see a show of hands. How many people started off with version before CRM 2011? Anybody? A few of you? Okay, not that many. Okay. Okay, great. The reason that I ask is because I actually wrote a program to convert the object model from CRM 4.0 to CRM 2011 because it was 100% change. Everything changed. This is just a modification of code we already have. But with 2011, they introduced the XRM page object model, and it totally transformed everything. So everything had to be converted. And it was quite of an ordeal for a lot of companies. And I wrote that application to actually help with the transition because it would convert everything in seconds instead of days is what it took a human. So this is not as bad a transition as that, but it is going to affect us at some point in the future. So remember that I want to be able to kind of guide you down a path of this is coming, and remember the way that the deprecation works is it's not affecting us right now, but it will affect us in the future. So just keep that in mind. So a lot of what they did is they just moved things around. Everything that we're used to using is still there in most cases, and then there's a bunch of new stuff and things like that. So most of what they did is they just kind of realigned some of the objects or the methods or the pieces of data that we're used to and just put them somewhere else. So the first set is the XRM.page.context. So the context is information about the environment that you're working in. So it could be the user, it could be the form, it could be the organization. All of these things are information that helps you develop applications that are tuned to a specific user or security role or whatever else it might be. So what they did here is they took the settings that information that we would pull out of the context, again, the environment, and put them underneath either user settings or organization settings. And then they added a bunch more stuff that we can do from there. So the most common things we use with the user type settings was the user ID, the user name, and then the list of security role goods. Then they added other information to organization settings, like is autosave enabled, or what is the org unique name if you had some code that was specific to an organization, things like that. So again, they're just moving things around. So the way it worked before is you basically just, it was kind of a static piece of data, xrm.page.context.something will give you an answer back. Now what you need to do is generate a global context, and then there's either a user setting or an organization settings to actually pull that data out. Same data, just a little bit different context to where you would use it. Our grid has changed a bit, so they've gone from grid row to get data to grid row data, and then also for the data entity. And then the grid stuff has been greatly enhanced. We'll talk about hopefully that at the end, kind of go through some of the new methods and stuff. Some of the biggest changes are with the utility methods that we use, because if you haven't gotten into the habit of using alert dialog and confirm dialog for your alerts and confirmations from JavaScript, you might want to start doing that, because what that does is it pops up a dialog box that is not JavaScript. It's actually an application window, and a lot of times what they would do is if they saw you using the alert or the confirm JavaScript method, they would actually intercept that and put up their version, which I'm not sure works in all environments. But the main idea is they wanted a consistent thing to push us into using a single code base amongst all the applications. That's what all this stuff is about. So a lot of the changes they're making, they're trying to get everything kind of aligned, so no matter what environment we're in, so the website or on mobile or on some other form factor that we're using right now, any of these things that we're working on, the code works the same. So the alert and the confirm dialogues were kind of the precursor to that, but they happened a long time ago, strictly because the JavaScript alert wouldn't work properly on a mobile device. It just wouldn't pop up. So they created their own, like I said. So they've extended that. They've moved anything that kind of opens up or has any kind of navigation thing into an XRM.navigation object. And then it's open alert dialog, open confirm dialog, open web resource, open form. So those things, anything having to do with any kind of thing that happens within the page, as far as dialogues popping up, are now part of the XRM.navigation item. Co-ask, where can you find the full list of deprecated? I'll show that to you in a minute, but it's on their website. It's been up for months, quite honestly. If you just look for what's changed or what's new with July release of Dynamics 365, just do a Google search for that. A couple of interesting ones we'll get into in a little bit with the XRM.device. We had the ability to grab a barcode and get the current position being the GPS coordinates. That's been moved into device, and it's been kind of enhanced. So that's we'll talk about that in a minute, how that's kind of maybe opened some new doors for us. With the mobile version of XRM, we had the ability to actually perform calls that allows us to actually see do things like create, update, read, things like that. That is basically been moved out into XRM.web API. One second. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. This is one of the biggest changes that's going to affect us, a lot of us actually. Okay, so let me see a show of hands. How many people did we have that actually used web resources that were HTML or other things where you were actually communicating with the parent form? Anybody? Francois? A few of you. Okay, great. Okay, so the way it worked is we would use parent. So parent would be a JavaScript, a base JavaScript object, then that would get us the form, and then we would use XRM.page, and everything else worked the same way after that. So there's been a slight change to it. So everything kind of still works the same as it did before, but depending on where you're actually working with it, if you're still in that situation where you have a web resource, of HTML web resource, parent.xrm.star, star meaning anything else following that, still works the same. But if we have parent.xrm from a sitemap, so if you didn't know that, you could actually run stuff from a sitemap or have a web resource that was loaded from the sitemap, that's not going to work correctly now. So just kind of be advised about that. So that's a testing place that you're going to have to find. Okay, how many people know what a custom control is? Anybody? A few of you? Oh, check class is on. Oh, chat's on. Yay. So here's the deal. Now, I can't find a reference to them yet, so I don't think they've shipped. But here is a backstory about this. So part of the quest for the future that the product team set forth for themselves many years ago is they are eliminating a lot of legacy code that they have, a lot of legacy designs. If you saw the first webinar on the V9 changes, I had this image up, this kind of map of how they laid things out. But one of the things that they are doing is all of the controls that they have that they use for the Dynamics 365 product itself, at least the CRM piece, are basically custom controls. And then what they are going to do is they are giving us the ability to create our own custom controls. Okay. If anybody worked with the Unified Service Desk or USD, that had a similar thing where you could define custom controls that had properties and actions and things like that. So the ability to actually create something that was specific to the way that you worked, if you knew you needed to access something at a very, very low level on a form, you could do that. So what they're doing is they're moving all of the user interface controls for the product into this custom control framework or CCF model. And then they are actually, one thing I saw, now again, this is, when they talked about the executive briefing, months ago, one of the things that they told us that they were actually going to give us the source code to those things. And so if we wanted to create our own control, as long as we followed the rules of the custom control thing, we could do so. So that's a really cool thing. So some of the things, now I really never work with these because they were based on the autocomplete thing, but with, I think it was with Dynamics 365, I think it's when they shipped, or maybe the end of 2016, we had the ability to monitor key presses and do autocomplete. Based on a criteria that we defined. They work hand in hand. So what they're doing is they're deprecating these and they're actually putting them into the custom control framework for you to create your own controls, because again, it is a true application user interface control, and it allows you to actually handle all of the work that is represented by the UI control, which is you've got to allow people to enter data, you've got to allow people to click, you got to display data, you got to show what the control looks like. All of these things people are actually doing. Okay, so like I said, I couldn't find any reference to this. So I'm pretty sure it has not shipped. It's a very big deal. I do not know if this actually got included in V9. I know it's coming. So, as you know, V9 was very late. It shipped in October instead of July when it was supposed to. And this could have been one of the things that got pushed off to a further release. Again, unknown as to actually how this is going to surface. Supposedly we have an update, I think, coming up in December. I think it's called the fall release. I'm not positive about that, but that's their cycle. So there were some development changes recently in the product team. I'm unclear and unknown if that's going to affect the release cycle. But remember, we were having a spring and a fall release cycles. I'm not sure that's going to go. So this could show up in the fall release. It could show up in the spring release, or it could show up at some time in the future. So just a very, very long-winded story to say this is something that's going to be really cool and neat once it ships. It allows to create very interesting applications. that don't look like CRM anymore, but can act the way the customer needs. Okay. Okay, new and changed client APIs. So the biggest thing I kind of mentioned earlier is we're removing the XRM.page.context object and moving it to the utility object that's now called GetGlobalContext. So this method will return the context object, and all the things we talked about earlier are going to be inside of that. We now have XRM.device, encoding, navigation, and web API. So those things have been separated out to kind of further granulate the different types of things. So, you know, this is a good thing. Here is what the form context kind of looks like now. So once we get the form context, now the form context is a new thing. It's basically what used to be just XRM.page is really truly what it was. And we'll kind of get into this in a little bit about why this is a little bit different than what we expect. We now have the ability to do data, and then we have entity and process stuff. All the other things that we have worked with in the past are still there, mostly in exactly the same places. So if you think about xrm.page.data or xrm.page.controls.ui, things like that, they've kind of flattened it a bit, but this is what it looks like now. So the the form context.data is basically the data elements for the form context. Now, one thing to note about the form context is the form context is contextual. And it's kind of sounding silly, but that's what it means. We have the form, and then we have a grid. That's also a context. So depending on where you're working, and one of the examples that we'll talk about in a little bit, actually will work on either data from a grid or data from the form itself. Because previously you had kind of two different types of coding you had to do to access form data versus grid data that was on a form. We're talking subgrid data. Now we can access both of them in the same manner. And again, this is really to just bring consistency to the model. That's what it's about. Form context of data to entity has a couple new methods. Get entity reference, which gets basically it returns a lookup object for the current record. And then another one, they have two of them called is valid different places, and it's to basically make sure that the form data is created properly. Unknown as to why this would be a necessity, but that's one of the things we got. A new one we have is a set precision. So the decimal, money, and the other control, whatever, I can't remember the data type, the third one, it's a floating point one. Basically, you could get the precision in previous versions, but you could never set it. So the only time you could set the precision was actually on the field definition itself. So with this, we can actually change the precision, and that's the number of decimals after the period is what that's for, or comma, depending on what part of the world you're in. The UI has been modified a little bit, so we still have controls, form selector, navigation, process, quick forms, and tabs. Those haven't changed. So pretty much this is exactly the same, just a little bit different as far as how you get to the data. Okay, so what does this all mean? So here's the first change you're going to notice. And I did fire off an email to Jim Daly in the documentation team because it mentions that the XRM.page is a static variable that is used for backward compatibility because that's what we all use right now. If you write a line of code right now in CRM, you're going to write it just like this, at the first example here. So the question is it going to be deprecated or is it not? The paragraph right above that said it was going to be deprecated, but then they had a note saying that it was just going to be static, means they're not going to change it. So is it going away or not going away? I don't know. So look at these two pieces of code, exactly the same code. There's only two differences here. The first difference is in the function display name, we're passing in the execution context. The second thing is taking the execution context, we have to get the context of the form using the getFormContext method. Once we have that, we're back to exactly how we would use things before. So let's assume that form context and XRM.page are exactly the same thing. We can get the attribute handle to first name and get the value, stick it in the first name field, same with last name, and then print those two out with, to the JavaScript console with a space in between. So this is a piece of code that has to be modified. The biggest change is on any handler. This is the problem. Any handler, we have to check the box that says pass execution context as first parameter. So I'm assuming that somebody is going to make an XRM toolbox tool to do this for us. Tanguy has basically probably already got this done. I haven't checked with him, but he's pretty smart and pretty quick. So what this means is all of our methods actually have to be done like this. On the side, other side of this, how many people have used the add-on change or add-on save method within the object model, the current object model? Anybody? A few of you? Okay. So if you have used that object, that method, which will actually add an on-change event, so like this is an on-change event, it will, if you use the add-on change method and specify this function name, whatever function name we have here, it automatically adds the execution context. So the cool thing, if you've done this with code instead of configuration, as you see here, you're fine. Okay. If you're using configuration like this, you're going to have to open each one up and check the box in order to get to this execution thing. And again, then you'll have to add the parameter there to actually allow you to access the context, and then add that line. So basically 3 changes have to be made. So we have to enable the passing of the execution context. We have to put an execution context parameter on the function. And then finally, we have to pull the form context from that. Okay, so 3 things. Francois says, great. Yeah, it's a bit of work. So here is the new XRM object. So we have device, encoding, navigation, panel, utility, and web API. Those are the top levels. Okay, as you can see by the legend, anything is in green is new. Now, I don't know why they did this. I think this is one of the silliest things I've seen them do. They created an intermediate object on Web API called online and offline, so that we use one set of code for one thing and one set of code for the other thing. I have no clue why they would have done that. That doesn't seem like a good design to me. Maybe they know something I don't. That's a probable. Okay, I don't know everything. But basically what this means is if we want to write one piece of code that works offline, and this is mostly for the mobile client, when you're in offline mode and you want to be able to query the local database, you have to use the offline version of the web API to do the query. So there was some kind of differentiator that I'm not aware of that made them go this route. But what that means is you now have to have 2 code paths. So you have to see if you're online. If you're online, you can use web API.online. If you're offline, you have to use web API.offline. Now you can get those are objects, so you can put them into a variable and just use that. And then that's pretty much it. But it's just a little bit, I'm not sure why they couldn't just use a property that just said offline or online, whatever nomenclature they would like to use. I'm not sure why they did not do that, but they chose this route, so this is what we're stuck with. So Diana has a question. How can we add on change the event? There's no blah 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 blah. Sure there is, Diana. I'll cover that later, I think. So here is change number 3. Enjoy the new stuff. So like I said, we have been waiting for this, and this is the irritating thing. This stuff that you see in front of you has been inside the JavaScript object model for CRM or Dynamics 365 for as long as I have worked with CRM. Okay, ever. It's also been internal, so they wouldn't let us use it. Now, I know a long time ago we used to do stuff just to get the job done, and it cost us a lot of pain and suffering when we did upgrades and stuff like that. But this stuff has always been there, but they now finally surfaced it for us. So we can create records, delete, retrieve a record, retrieve multiple records, execute a function or action or anything else like that, and then execute multiple. Okay. So what this means is we no longer have to have things like the stuff that comes in the SDK. We don't have to have XRM Service Toolkit, whichever version, or any of the other things that work with this. We can just use the standard web API. And this is built into the system. It's supported by the product team, and this is going to make our life much, much easier. Okay. So this is the biggest thing that I'm kind of excited about is I finally get to remove a dependency on a third-party library, okay? Because again, the less code you have to maintain, the better off your life will be. Navigation changed a bunch. Like I said, they moved all of the things into it from that would open any kind of dialogue, renamed a few things. So we have alert, confirm, and error. Error is new. Open file is new. Open URL is new. Open form is not new, and open web resource is not new. One change to this is the open form is now able to open an entity form, which is the normal form, or the quick create form. Previously we had open form and open quick create form were two separate methods. They've combined that, and now there's a flag in there that says open quick create, or is this a quick create form? So device. Now this is where things are going to get interesting. Let me see a show of hands. How many people will work with mobile or tablet devices? A few of you? Okay. Okay. So, here's some scenarios. Capture audio means we can record things. Capture image means we can take a picture. Capture video. Okay. We can read barcodes. We can get the current GPS position, and then we can select a file on a computer. This really opens up what we can do is without, as Doug says, without resorting to field service, we can actually create applications that access the device information and allow us to do things that we normally couldn't do. Okay, so there's a lot of interesting possibilities here that gives us stuff like the first one I can think of is like a read barcode. Think about it, you creating an application that allow you to scan a barcode and check somebody into an event that you came to in person. Okay, that's a perfect example of that. Have I done it? No. Maybe that's another webinar to itself. Okay, but these are really cool things that they've surfaced to allow us to access the actual hardware, which is great. The object model has matured a bunch. So like I said, so they flattened it out a bit. They made it really consistent. Most of the time, when you call one of these new methods, you'll see that they have this fluent API. We have a then method at the end. And then there is a success or a failure callback. So in other words, depending on if the thing failed or succeeded, you can execute a specific block of code. Okay, so they're very consistent about that. Prior to this, these are just a few examples. It was kind of hit or miss. So some things had it, some things did not. So they've kind of the biggest changes that they've made with all this is to get consistent with how the entire object model was created. Now they weren't. In all honesty, there are a few things that they kind of didn't get right. I think just as far as the way if they made a method versus a property to do things. So a few things are still out there, but it's still pretty good. Okay. So let's go to a couple pages here. Okay, so the first thing is the page where we find everything is, what is going on here? Why is it doing that? Hang on a second. I don't know why that's like that. That's interesting. If you do like I said, if you do a search for, Edge is just acting all kinds of crazy today. If you do a search for what's new, basically Dynamics 365 July, what's new, you'll get to this page here. So this is a list of what's new, and then there are there's things for Enterprise Edition, important changes. We covered this last week or week 4, whatever it was, or last time. And then the thing we're talking about today is what's new for developers, Enterprise Edition. So this lists all of the things that are developer related that they're changing. And what we're looking at is the new is the stuff, the client API enhancements. So on this page is where you find all the stuff that we're talking about. So you get to see all the things they added, what they deprecated, and then there are just links that go into other things. If we go into our new customer engagement developer documentation, this is no longer the quote unquote SDK. they are no longer shipping a standalone SDK as they've done forever. So they asked the MVPs a couple years ago what we thought about this, and we basically shot them down and said it's a really bad idea. But so they waited a couple years and did it anyway. So the idea here is there will not be a help file that you can download. So the DLLs and tools that we have access to in the SDK are now in NuGet, which is how you can pull things down programmatically for part of your build process for .NET or whatever. And the samples, they said, are going to be either on the MSDN sample site or on GitHub. I honestly have not spent any time looking for either one of those to figure out where they actually ended up. But that'll be something that I'll try and document whenever I actually spend time looking at it. So the idea here is it was kind of a pain in the butt to do the online version, which they had to do, and then the help file version because the generation was just a little bit too different, and it cost them a lot of time and trouble to do that. So they decided to go with a online only version, and they've also renamed it from SDK to not. Now, here's a cool thing about this. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you will see this thing that says download PDF. So if I click on that, depending on where I was within that tree, it will actually generate a PDF that contains that information. Okay, so they didn't totally leave us in an online only situation, and this is actually pretty cool. I mean, if you look at this, this is very, very well done, and it's very readable. It looks exactly like what was on the web page. Okay, even the code samples and stuff. Now they're not colored like they would be on the web page, but other than that, they are. Okay, so kudos to them for going that extra mile to give us something we could do. So I think this is a great thing that they've done here. So, and they've also made the APIs or the documentation somewhat consistent. And if you didn't know it, at the top here, every time you hit a topic, it will tell you how many minutes it takes to read this. This is a documentation kind of a standard now, evidently. So it tells you how it did it, and then it tells you who wrote this, which was on this one, it was Kumar. So that's good. And also, if you didn't see that, sorry, back again. So what's funny about this is it went to his GitHub profile. So here are things that Kumar has worked on. So he doesn't have any repositories. He's had a pull request for Fusion TLC changes, etc. So anyway, so if you want to who wrote this and what other things I may have contributed to, that's how you find that. Okay. Let's see. So Diana mentions about the add-on change. So our question was, how can we add on change event if there is no xrm.page.getAttribute.addon change? And of course, I don't have an environment loaded. So Diana, what you would do is, where was that code at? On the onload event, you check that box. And you do get that form context off the environment, and then you do the same thing you did before. So it's literally that one. If you look back at the code thing there with this one, so it would be quite honestly the same thing right here. That's how you do it. So again, the biggest thing is you've got to go to the form properties for the onload event and check that box. And then you have to make the change there, add that line, and then from that point forward, it works exactly the same as it did before. Okay? Francois said, can you show me again where to download the PDF? I guess. The button right there at the very, very bottom of the table of contents is what it is. And as I mentioned, it seemed to me that it would, maybe it may download the whole thing. I thought it was context sensitive. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Okay, so yeah. So it's in the bottom left-hand corner. It just says download PDF. And you know what it is? That's not a live generation. That is just a generation. So yeah. So the file it's downloading is client API.pdf. So that is basically going to be whatever that main topic is, I would bet. So if I go to best practices, no, still the same thing. What is going on? Okay. So what questions do we have here? I know that's just a kind of a, touching the bottom end there, but like I said, there's a lot to think about. And again, we don't have to make any changes now. So the idea here is as you go through your work, if you want to start adopting to the new API, then you can do that. Now, that being said, if you don't have version 9, this won't work. Okay, so if you're on premises, don't worry about it. If you're online, you can't do it unless you have a brand new org that started after October the 1st or 4th or whatever it was. You can't do this. If you have not upgraded your org, which I'm not even sure the upgrade path is enabled at this point. So until you actually have version 9, you can't make any changes because all of these things are not there. So the only way you're going to be able to play with any of this is to either upgrade your org or spin up a trial. Okay. So yeah, so that's the big thing right now is, again, it's not going to affect anybody for until the next major release, which I'm assuming is going to be 10. No idea when that's going to hit. That says, have you heard when they're going to do version 9 on-prem? I have no clue about that whatsoever. Yeah, I don't know about the on-premises version at all. I'm actually kind of shocked that they haven't actually released it because so a very long time ago when they started this biannual release process, what they said is the spring version would be online, the fall version would be online and on-prem to catch everybody up. They never did that. They kept everybody up at the same time. Maybe they went to that. I don't know. Okay, David says, just to be clear, there is no equivalent replacement for XRM.page context. Yes, David, there is. Yeah. If you go back to the execution context. It's basically mostly that. If I go back to that slide. Yeah, so utility.getGlobalContext is exactly the same thing, David. Atul says, I have developed XRM.page, so when will what should work? I have no clue. Microsoft is any support or to migration, you're looking at the support, which is the documentation. So like I said, I wrote an application to upgrade from 4.0 to 2011. Okay. Microsoft didn't do that. That was beyond the scope of something that they wanted to tackle. I mean, it was a big job, quite honestly. Learned a lot. Wish I'd sold more, but oh well. But yeah, so you're going to have to basically kind of do it yourself. So here's your guidance about what to do, and it's kind of up to you to actually go and do it. Sanford says that tools scan for web resources, etc. You're talking about the I don't remember the name of the tool. Yeah, I have no idea. I haven't heard of anything like that, quite honestly. So what he's talking about is there was before you upgraded, there was a validation. It was actually the code validator is what they called it. That's what they call it, code validator. And it would look through all your JavaScript to see if you're using CRM 4.0 methods or 4.0 endpoints that were going to be deprecated, and it would give you a list of all of those. Quite honestly, this is not that. This would be much more complicated. Because you would literally, okay, we're using XRM.page, where you're going to be using XRM.page on every single line of code almost. So it wouldn't give you it wouldn't do any good to give you a report like that. So like I said, this will be coming, sometime in the future. So like I said, I wouldn't rush to, again, most people can't do anything anyway because they don't, if you've got a brand new org, then you're starting from scratch, so it's not going to do any good. But just plan for this and plan to see that this is something you have to worry about. And San Francisco, and it's not as simple as find and replace. No, sir, it's not as simple as find and replace. I actually entertain maybe updating Transformer to handle stuff like this, but quite honestly, I had so much fun the first time, I don't want to do it the second time. This is way more complicated, way more complicated. Ritesh, all the webinars are recorded. They're all put on my YouTube channel. So subscribe to that, please. Felix asks, is the GetGlobalContext in a version less than 9? No, it's only in 9. So Will brings up a point. Even though we're not on 9, we might as well go ahead and check the past execution context. I don't know. I heard that actually gave a little bit of a performance hit, but I don't know for sure how much of a performance hit it was. It couldn't hurt anything. I mean, it's JavaScript. It's just going to ignore it. So unless you have another parameter already sitting there in your function, if your function does not take parameters, it won't be a big deal. But if it does take parameters, then you're going to have to add the execution context as the first one. Otherwise, nothing will line up anymore. What else you got? Anything? Okay. Will Microsoft do away with that in the future? I have no idea, dude. Don't ask me future with Microsoft. I have no clue. We're all in this together. Who knows? Doug, async loading of JavaScript libraries. I have no idea. Nothing seems to have changed with that at all. So yeah, at least I have not seen anything. So I think that still works the same as it has. Anybody else? If not, then we'll call this a day and I'll get your time back. Until says just start new development work as long as you have V9. If you do not have V9, none of this will work. So if you are starting on a brand new organization online that has V9, then yes, start using this process here, these new structures, and then you'll be fine. Alrighty.